Awesome. Well, good morning. I know it's Friday morning, so I won't take up a ton of time. Um, and this one will, like I said, on the last one for harnesses, once we do the inspection on the harnesses, so if you weren't on the call and you haven't seen that webinar, I would highly suggest going and YouTube and finding it. Um, Once you learn how to do the inspection of a harness, everything else just sort of follows suit. So this one won't take a whole lot of time, not as much time as the harness one did, just because there's a lot of similarities, right? So when we look at, so this is, we're talking about connectors. So anything that connects us to the structure. So our lanyard. So we're going to focus on lanyards today. So we have our lanyards and we have different types of lanyards. So you have a lanyard with an energy absorber. They all have energy absorbers, but this one is like a shock pack style or energy absorber pack. So you see it, and then you'll always see where there's the color of the lanyard, and then you'll see white. And it kind of weaves throughout all of this. And then we have the other style, which is our like bungee style. So the energy absorber is not folded up in a pack. It's actually, think of the elastic on your sweatpants. We all know that, right? Especially at Thanksgiving, which and Christmas when we eat too much. So the elastic, so there's actually what's called a tubular tear webbing that is inside of here, and there's actually another piece of webbing that goes inside of that. And so when we see that bungee style, that is where it's an internal energy absorber. So it's throughout the entire lanyard. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So those are the two types of lanyards, the two energy absorbers that you'll see in lanyards. And we can get way deep, we can kind of go all over with it. But really, we're talking about the inspection of these lanyards, right? So we are going to look at the same things. And there's also the inspection sheet on the SAI website under the Fall Protection Council. You'll see the inspection log that you can use as an example. Um, so we look at the same thing. So we look at the hardware, we look at the webbing, we look at the stitch patterns, and we look at the labels. The only difference is that we now are going to look at the functionality of the metal. Okay. So not only on the harnesses we looked at, and we did look at the functionality a little bit when we look at the connectors, if they're quick connect and they come together the right way. But there's more functionality looking at when we look at the lanyard this way. So first thing we're going to look at the label. Okay. So you're going to see labels, whether it's under a plastic in the energy absorber or whether you see a label that is protected by a little Velcro piece and then has all this tiny, lovely little print in a label. Things that we're looking for on the label, we're looking for the same thing we did on the harness. So we're looking for the data manufacturer, the model number, the standards that it meets. And for ANSI, it's going to be ANSI Z359.13, which is lanyards and energy absorbers or energy absorbing lanyards. A lot of people put shock absorbing. Um, the other thing is, again, just like the harness, you're going to look for a serial number or a unique identifying number. And remember that Miller uses, they call it an inspection number. Most of the other ones have a serial number, the other manufacturers, but you may have to look depending on the manufacturer. And they all kind of have their own inspection criteria and logs and all that. So remember, this is a broad overview, right? Okay. So our connectors are, so then we looked at the label. Oh, the other thing I want to talk about on the label, and this kind of goes to choosing the right tool for the job. So you'll see on this label that it says 6 feet with an average arrest force of 900 pounds. I'm trying to figure my camera out. So it's Friday. So you'll have that 6-foot free fall with an average arrest force of 900 pounds. So this lanyard is only designed for a 6-foot free fall. Now, if it were designed for a 12-foot free fall, and remember, OSHA doesn't recognize anything beyond a 6-foot free fall. So now we're falling into the ANSI standard. So ANSI recognizes that we don't always have something over our head, so that we may increase that free fall distance to beyond 6 feet. So then you'll see a black label with 12-foot free fall and an average arrest force of 1,350 pounds. But all of them will state with a maximum arrest force of 1,800 pounds, because that's how both OSHA and ANSI look at it. You'll also see the maximum weight of the user. And remember, the weight of the user is not just how much I weigh, it's how much I weigh and all the fun stuff I'm carrying with me wherever I'm going or whatever job I'm doing. Okay. Um, so then we're going to go to hardware. So when we look at hardware, you're either going to see a snap hook. So you have small snap hooks. We have monster snap hooks. Well, there's Harold. And then we have carabiners. So OSHA have, nah, I always get these two screwed up. So in 1989, OSHA changed to dual action or auto locking, meaning 2 movements to open it. Okay. Same goes for snap hooks, 2 movements to get it to open. So if I can press it open, then it comes out of service. Okay, so it has to do 2 movements to get it to open. Now, what we're looking for when we're doing these inspections, and you'll see this a lot with the smaller metal carabiners on lanyards. When I twist it and open it, if it's used in kind of an icky environment, it'll get stuck. Like it'll start to close really slowly, or it'll kind of stick open. Out of service it comes. Most manufacturers, everybody goes, let's put WD-40 on it. While it probably won't ruin the carabiner, most manufacturers won't allow you to put any of that on there. You can check with them, some might. It just depends. So basically, if it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or it opens with one action, then it comes out of service. So we're looking, just like we talked about on the harnesses, we're looking for rust, corrosion, anything that affects the integrity of the metal. We know that it's rated for 5,000 pounds this way. And then in 2007, ANSI changed their standard on connectors to state that the gate needed to be rated for 3,600 pounds. How do I find that out? So part of the to meet the standard, it has to be stamped on the gate. So on carabiners, it's stamped usually at the top or the bottom of the gate where you twist and open. On snap hooks, it's on the gate, and it has to say gate 3,600 pounds ANSI Z359.12. That's the connector standard. So a lot of times you'll see it along the gate. It has to be on the gate. It can't be on the spine of the snap hook. It has to be directly on the gate. So you'll see it along the side of the gate, or you'll see it on the front of the gate. And so we know, and then you'll see 22. A lot of times you'll see 5,000 pounds or 22.5 kilonewtons or 23 kilonewtons on the spine, because that's what this hook is rated for, 5,000 pounds. But now we're looking at what's that gate rated for, because the reality is that anytime that we're attaching this to something, there's a potential that you're going to side load this. And we know, based on what I just said earlier, the maximum allowed force that's allowed on my body is 1,800 pounds, times 2 is 3,600 pounds. So that's where that number came from. And so there's that 2-to-1 safety factor that we kind of look at within fall protection. So we know that if it's stamped and rated and tested correctly to the standard, it'll take a little bit better of a beating. But so the what we're looking for is that stamp on the gate? Then we check the functionality, right? Make sure that it opens and closes the way that it's supposed to. This is a weird hook. So same with carabiners, twist it, make sure it works properly, make sure it's not rusted, corroded, that nothing's affecting the integrity of the metal, that you don't have any cracking, especially when you have aluminum, which we're starting to see a lot more of. That we know that aluminum will take a beating to a certain point and then start cracking. Steel is a little bit different. It'll take a beating and it'll just kind of keep going until whatever it's holding it together starts flying and popping. When I did the testing for this, so I took a whole bunch of hooks and a whole bunch of carabiners and I tested them to the standard. So basically the way that the standard is written is that you push on the gate. So you put it on a bar and you just keep pressing on that gate to 3,600 pounds, and then it has to hold for 1 minute. If you find, and there are still manufacturers out there that will build a lanyard with a carabiner or a snap hook. A lot of times you'll see it more in carabiners and snap hooks, but you'll see it where there's no rating on the gate at all. And when I did the testing, the most I could get some of those gates to hold was 250 pounds. And an average worker carrying all their stuff can float around that weight, right? So it's important to understand that. No, there's no OSHA regulation that says that you have to do it. It floats under ANSI. And we all know that when it comes to fall protection, OSHA is going to look at the general duty clause and they're going to they're going to look at what is the ANSI state. And that's what ANSI states. So as we look at the hardware, rust, corrosion, anything that affects the integrity of the metal, right? Because this is what's connecting us to whatever the structure is. Now, we're going to look at the webbing. So because we have two different styles of lanyards, so we have that bungee style and then we have the straight webbing style. When you look at the bungee style, and this is kind of hard to do, but I'll kind of simulate it on the table. So typically when I take these lanyards, I stand on the hook and then you pull the webbing so that you can see, because if I look at it this way, there are spots that I'm not going to be able to see of the webbing. So I want to make sure that I pull this webbing and you'll actually see where it's dirty and clean, because that's how it stays bunched up like that. So you always want to make sure that you're basically just pulling all that webbing so that you can see. And typically what will happen is that if we know that we beat stuff up when we're out in the field and it gets caught on things and we don't really check to see what we're caught on. We just start yanking or we keep dragging or whatever. And a lot of times what will happen in the bungee style lanyards is it'll get a snag and it'll start tearing that webbing right up the middle. And you won't be able to see that unless you pull that kind of away so that you can see the webbing flat. Now, things that we're looking for is that if there's a hole in it, can I see the tear webbing through it? If there's a hole in it and I can see that tear webbing, out of service it comes. And remember what we said in the first call, if we remove something from service because it fails inspection, it needs to be destroyed so that no one else can use it. Because remember, one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So we always want to make sure that we destroy it. Now, if it was removed from service because it was in a fall, then we tag it and we make sure it gets to the safety manager in a manner that no one else could mistakenly grab it and use it in the field. So we keep going through that webbing on the bungee style until you get all the way up to the other hook. And you do that if it's a twin leg, you do it on both legs. If it's a single leg, you do it on just that one leg. So if I have a straight web lanyard that goes to an energy absorber, so now I'm looking at the webbing. And again, what are we looking for in the webbing? Cuts, frays, holes, burns. Remember, you're only allowed 1/16 of a cut, fray, hole, or burn. Basically, if you can see it, out of service it comes. Okay. And I have at the end of this, I have a little presentation that Jackie will put out on the web for you guys that we just we had a little bit of fun, and we kind of used what we kind of do for some testing, some repetitive friction, and you'll get to see how dramatic that can be with the webbing. And so we'll show that kind of towards the end. So when we look at the webbing, we're looking for any of that cut, fray, hole, burn, anything that's going to affect the integrity of the webbing. And like we said on the last one, all of these can be washed in a mild soap and water. If they get gross, they they can get removed from service for what we call excessive soiling. And basically what that means is that if you can't feel the grooves in that webbing anymore, that it needs to come out of service. And you can't wash it. And remember, just like the harness, no paint, no marker. There's only one manufacturer that allows you to write on the webbing, and that's 3M. And now you have to use their special 3M harness marker. Yay. So just understand that most of the other manufacturers don't allow it. You just have to check with the manufacturer, but I do know that most all do not. The only one that does is 3M, and you have to use their special markers. So, and that's kind of tough to make sure that everybody actually does that, which is why most manufacturers will create spots or little nameplate places for you to write your name, or you can use zip ties. I even actually brought a bunch because I didn't have them last time. Oh, you can put all these fun colors on there. Uh, Again, just like we talked about on the harnesses, we don't allow tape on any of the fall protection. We can't see underneath it. So unless you're Superman, you can't inspect underneath it. And B, that adhesive is going to damage that webbing. It's going to drive all the dirt and all the grime and everything in there. And underneath, it's going to be like just cutting like glass, and it will ruin it. And you won't know it's happening. That's the bad part. So we have looked at the hardware. So rust, corrosion, anything that affects the integrity of the metal, webbing, just like we talked about with the harnesses, cuts, frays, holes, burns, weld slag, paint, caustic chemicals, bleach. All of those are negative things that can't be allowed near the webbing. There are tools out there. Manufacturers make different types of webbing that will withstand weld slag. They're FR rated. There are lanyards out there that are designed with a almost like a, if you think of a PVC pipe but flexible, and it's adhered to the webbing. So if you get paint on it, weld slag, anything comes right off, washes. Not the most comfortable and really hot in the summer, but there are tools out there so that if you're using those types of chemicals, anything that hardens, right? Um, Paints that harden, special sealants that kind of harden, that what that does is it dries on the webbing, and then when you move that lanyard or harness, those fibers underneath there break, and it weakens the strength of it. And so that webbing is rated for over 5,000 pounds, and if we weaken the strength of it and then we fall in it, it may not hold us anymore. Okay, so that's how important making sure that we're looking at the webbing, the hardware, we're doing that inspection. And remember, OSHA says that you have to inspect your equipment prior to use by the user. And then all manufacturers state that it needs to be inspected prior to use by the user, and annually, at the very least annually, by documented inspection by a competent person other than the user. We always want someone else to look at it, because if we look at it all the time, we just get like, oh, yeah, right? And so another set of eyes might see something that we don't see, just because we're the ones looking at it every single day. In California, a documented inspection is every 6 months, which is the Cal OSHA requirement. And you're starting to see some of the manufacturers are starting to kind of look at, should we be moving that up? It's not written in the standard yet, but some of the manufacturers are starting to kind of look at that. So we look at the webbing, same with the webbing and the bungee style, only we have to pull it to look at it, but we're looking for any of those cuts, frays, holes, burns. Keep in mind that anytime we're adding a friction point, so like where this is bending, so the snap hook that I'm attaching to something is always bending. Most manufacturers are going to reinforce that. So this manufacturer, you see where it has blue webbing and then black, they actually put another piece around because they know it's an added friction point, which is where the fraying and the tearing will start to come into play. But if we're in an environment where we're getting kind of caught on things, we need to kind of keep looking at that a little bit better. So again, everything is very similar when it comes to webbing, so I don't want to bore you too much. Stitch patterns, exactly the same as harnesses. Anytime you find that stitch pattern, that's where two pieces of webbing are sewn together. And this is the place. Now, when we talked about harnesses last time, I said you're going to be hard pressed to find an instance where you have broken stitches in a harness, other than when people sit on steel and scoot around, or sit on scaffolding and kind of move, and they're kind of shimmying down or whatever. Lanyards is where I actually see broken stitches a lot, and here's why. Because they drop that and then they drag it across the ground because they don't put it on the lanyard keepers that every single harness has now. If it meets the new standard, it has a place for you to attach your lanyard, the leg of your lanyard, but nobody does that, right? So then that drags along everything. Or one of the things that I started seeing with the window washers is that the rope kind of gets up against the especially if it's brick, the the wall of the building, and the lanyard will get on there and it'll start rubbing, and then you'll actually start seeing where the stitch pattern will actually fray, and then those stitches will break. So you won't necessarily see a ton of that in harnesses, but on lanyards, that's where you're going to start seeing it. And a lot of times it really comes down to, we threw it in the bottom of a job box, and I mean, this thing is 6 feet long, right? So now it's underneath there, and you got tools and everything on there, and you're yanking, and the drill bit is digging in, right in that one spot, and it's holding everything down, and you just keep yanking, and that's where we start seeing, that pull, even though it's freaky strong, like, not kidding. It is that stitch pattern makes that incredibly strong, but you can damage that and start pulling at it. And if we keep doing that over time, then you start seeing broken stitches. So this is where we truly do start seeing broken stitches, is in lanyards. And a lot of it has to do with the storage of our gear, how we're storing it. If it's in the bottom of a job box and you start yanking, yeah, that you're going to have that trouble, right? Um, so, and some stitch patterns you're going to see like double, you'll see extra ones. I know Miller does like a double. I think we talked about it on the lanyard one, or on the harness, that they do like a double stitch, so that start and stop stitch that's fuzzy, that's okay. Now on lanyards, impact indicators. So if you have the energy absorber that's like this, the the impact indicator is the energy absorber, because what happens is, and I have one right here that's deployed. So in here, we have this tear webbing. And so basically what happens is, you fall, something has to absorb that energy, right? Because you're building up, This thing is 6 feet long. I'm building up some force as I'm flapping like a bird or rolling the windows down, going, ah! I don't have a choice. I'm going that far, right? So I build up that velocity, I build up that force. Something has to absorb that energy so my body doesn't see that extreme force. So we have what's the technical term for it is called tear webbing. And so basically it kind of acts like a zipper underneath in the webbing, and it pops out and tears. And so as this tears, it's fuzzy. As it tears, it's absorbing the energy. So when it's deployed, whether it's a little bit or a lot, you're going to know right away that that lanyard was deployed. Now on the bungee style one, that's not as easy, but there are there are these little, and most manufacturers, and they're all a little bit different. So basically they'll say there's a tag, and if it deploys and it says, if you can read this lanyard was deployed or has been in a fall, or whatever wording they choose to use, or this needs to be removed from service, or hey, guess what? Somebody fell on your lanyard. Um, and it takes about 450 pounds to start to deploy that. If you can't find the impact indicator on the bungee style, basically if you hold it up in the air, especially if it's a twin leg, and you hold it up in the air and one leg is 4 feet longer than the other one, that lanyard was deployed. Because in these, for the 6-foot free fall, there's about 4 feet of deceleration, meaning there's 4 feet of energy absorber within that system. Used to be 3.5, but when we switched to the higher test weight, it went to 4 feet. This is going to change in the near future, within the next year to 2 years, depending. That test weight is increasing again. So what ANSI is doing is straight across the board, they're going, because right now in lanyards, it isn't 310 pounds. They're going to test at 310 on everything, harnesses, lanyards, SRLs, you name it. It will all be tested at 310 pounds for a steel weight. Currently, it's not that, it's a little bit lower than that. So you're going to see, you might see the length of deceleration, max deceleration in lanyards increase a little bit, because if we increase that test weight, we tend to end up increasing the amount of energy absorption, or the energy absorber to absorb that energy, so our body doesn't see that amount of force. And remember, when we're looking at ANSI, we're trying to keep that average arrest force on a 6-foot free fall under 900 pounds. So, and typically when I've done all the testing, it's usually, it floats around upper 700s to mid 800s is the average that you tend to get. The ones I've tested anyway. What, Brian? Did ANSI increase the maximum deceleration distance from 3 feet? I'm not sure I'm following you on that. Because they allow, so you're allowed your free fall and your maximum
Yeah,
deceleration.
let me just unmute real quick. Yeah, the
Okay.
maximum deceleration was always 3.5 feet. You said they've increased to 4. Is that in
Mhm.
the ANSI standard too? Did they increase
It's
that there?
not, it's based on the manufacturers and whatever system they're using for energy absorption. So you have to go back to the manufacturer and find out what their max, and it should state somewhere in their paperwork what their max deceleration distance is. And
I thought ANSI had
when you get to,
always. I
mm-mm,
thought the 3.5 came from ANSI.
no, it came from the test weight. What the test weight weighed, and it started at 220 pounds, and it went to like 280, 282 or 286. And then now it's going to 310. So it's based on the test weight and how you're keeping that energy absorption down. So nowhere in the standard does it say it has to be 3.5 feet or 4 feet. It's just kind of what it comes out to, keeping that force down.
I'm just thinking that's going to complicate the calculation for fall
That's why most
clearance.
people have gone away from putting numbers in the clearance calculation, because We're not all the same height, right? And each manufacturer's deceleration distance might be different because there's a max the there's a max, but it's actually I think it's like 5 feet is the max. So the 12-foot free fall lanyards currently they float around 5 feet in deceleration because now you're increasing that free fall distance, you're increasing the amount of force. And so when we increase that amount of force, something has to absorb the energy. And so usually the energy absorber has to get longer to absorb more. Now, that being said, there's a lot of technology out there nowadays that we're getting better with, the tear webbings or the tubular energy absorption that's within the bungee style. So we may not have that longer distance if we use a better tear webbing that absorbs it. Because if you look at some of the manufacturers, they might have an even shorter deceleration distance because they're using a different type of tear webbing or the lanyard itself is going to absorb some of the energy and the energy absorber within the system. So you're starting to see the technology. So it goes back to you have to look at whatever the manufacturer states. But for the most part, most of the tear webbing ones right now are about 4 feet, give or take. So look at you, you're front and center now. I don't know how that happened, but you get to stay there. So I like it. So if there is no label on a bungee style, measure you if it's a single leg, lay it out and measure it. If it's longer than 6 feet, it's been deployed. Whether it's a little bit or a lot, it needs to come out of service. So we looked at the label, we looked at the webbing, we looked at the stitch patterns and the hardware. Any questions? That was a lot and it was like drive by, but it's Friday and I know everybody's like, I don't want to listen to her much today. Heck, I don't want to listen to myself that much today. Any other questions other than Brian? Harold, nothing? Usually he's got questions. How many people are asleep?
Good morning. I do have questions.
I knew it.
My computer crashed, so I had to re-log on, and I apologize for that. Um, you recorded all this, I believe. Is it available for us? I lost
Yes.
15 minutes of it.
Yes.
Definitely.
Jackie will post it out on YouTube when they go through it.
The inspection grids that are on the back of the tags,
Yep.
the little things. So some of them have 10 slots, some people have 12 slots.
Most people don't use them.
Well, I understand. What is the criteria for not using them? Is it required that they get filled
No,
out?
it's not. Well, I mean, and you look at like here's one manufacturer. Like I know I'm old, but holy Hannah. Like, can you even see that?
Yeah, I can actually, but they don't have to be filled out. They're just there as an aid.
It's it's just there. The reality is, and so I talked to a couple OSHA investigators, and so they said that there's so many people that were using Excel spreadsheets, and so they have like all of their part numbers and everything in a spreadsheet, and what they found were that people were pencil whipping them, basically is what was happening. And so they stated that while they still allow those, they're starting to discuss and require that you use each manufacturer of fall protection has a sample of what you need to look for. Some are digital, some have a sheet that you can print out, some are in the back of the manual. And they also state that if you're going to use that spreadsheet, that's okay. But if you have multiple manufacturers of equipment, you need to make sure that you keep one manual from each manufacturer that you have on site, because each manufacturer states something just a little bit different, or their wording might be just that different that you need to look at something a different way. Does that
So
make
some of
sense?
yeah, thanks. Some of the tags have 12 slots, some have 10. If you're doing inspections twice a year, you run out. Is that telling you that the harness or lanyard, the device only has a life of 5 years? If you're doing it once
No.
a year and
In
there's 10
fact,
slots, or
that's a really good question, Harold. So, um, uh, most of the manufacturers, I won't say all, but most of the manufacturers have gone away from having an expiration date on their gear. Now, there are a couple that still do. I believe Petzl still has a 10-year lifespan on theirs. And there's one other manufacturer that does. Now, I will say that I've found that some manufacturers just left it on there and they'll write a letter if you question them on it. But they did it. It was essentially, it was kind of a sales tool back 9, 10 years ago, if not longer. And the problem with that is, and this is the reason that inspection is so key now, is because so many people have looked at, okay, there's an expiration date on my harness or my lanyard or whatever gear, right? So I don't care how I'm supposed to do this. I don't pay attention. I can do all of this, but if then at the end I tell you, well, this manufacturer says that this is good for 5 years. What's the one thing you took away from the entire, right? Is good for 5 years. See ya. I'm out. And what happened is we went away from people inspecting their gear prior to use and annually a documented inspection. We went completely away from that, and to the extent that when we went out in the field and started doing audits, people's gear were, I mean, 9 out of the 10 people out there, their gear failed inspection, whether it was the harness, the lanyard, the SRL, whatever, the lifeline, they weren't doing inspections. And so about 7 years ago, that backtracked really fast. That only lasted in the standard for maybe a year. And then it backtracked. And most of the manufacturers now state that the harness or lanyard or SRLs are a little different. They're good until they fail inspection or have been impacted.
good,
And
thank
so
you.
it's driving that message that we need to go back to that inspection, and that so the expiration dates or all of that, whether the little, I think they use an average, most manufacturers use an average of 12 on their little tag, and that's just legacy. It's just something that they've been doing for the last 20 years, and it never went out of the standard. It was just kind of like some people really like it and they want to use it, so let's just leave it in there. But there isn't a requirement that you have to have 10 or 12 or 24 or anything like that. That has nothing to do with how long that's going to last. Some gear doesn't last. I mean, I was going through, when I was climbing wind turbines, I was going through harnesses every 3 months. So, I mean, it just depends on the application and what you're doing and that kind of stuff. So that message goes back to inspection, and that's why I've always had the biggest drive and initiative and passion towards inspecting equipment and just making sure that people understand what they need to be looking for, and that we really do need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, your life depends on it. That's what I
Mhm.
tell everybody.
Definitely.
Thank you.
And I think there were a couple of chats that popped up here. Have any states banned nylon lanyards? No, there aren't any states that have banned any nylon lanyards. I think that you're starting to see most people go to self-retracting versus the straight lanyards, but they still have a place in our world, and you're still going to continue to see those. Um, Cable ones you still have the energy absorber on a cable lanyard. Um, and most manufacturers don't make them anymore because they get really, really expensive. Any other questions?
I had a comment. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually ran across a harness it was brand new. The safety person bought them. They bought all the wrong gear, but it actually stated that I'm trying to think how it worded it. It stated that it had to be quarterly inspected, and it was
Yep.
an oddball brand that I'd never even heard of before. So, and that kind of goes back to your point about it's going to go off what the manufacturer says, because that's what OSHA's going to look at. What does the manufacturer say about what the gear you're using? So, and I've gone away from those little tags, and I kind of do the same thing. I go to the manufacturer's website, download their inspection form, fill it out, and then I give it to the client so that they have it on file that shows that a qualified person other than the user inspected all their gear.
Yep, agreed. Because it's the first thing. If there is an incident that is fall related, the first thing they're going to ask is who's in charge, and the second thing they're going to ask is where's your inspection records.
Yeah.
But yeah, manufacturers in Europe does a lot of quarterly. So a lot of times you'll see manufacturers that will come from overseas or whatever, and we're starting to see more of that quarterly stuff kind of come into play. And to be honest, I really believe that people are not inspecting their gear to the extent that they should be.
No, they're not.
If they were, we wouldn't go out and find failed equipment that people are actually using.
Yeah, I'm on a job site right now in Oregon, and there's probably 20 pieces of fall gear laying all over the place. Of course, most of it's so frozen to the ground you can't touch it. I guarantee you they're not touched. They're not doing anything with it.
Oh, of course not. But that's why we're here.
And on a second note, I do appreciate you getting up early and walking through. It's always a good refresher to hear it from somebody else other than reading it in the book. And so I do appreciate you.
Oh, thank you.
Hey there, Becky. We have a couple questions from Jason over at Canada Scaffold. His first question is, have any states banned nylon lanyards and have made cable ones mandatory?
Okay, I just answered that one. I read
you
that
did?
one
Oh,
before
sorry.
Rob.
And then he also made a comment here for our scaffolders, we have them inspect monthly, plus our daily inspection prior to use. We document their monthly inspections.
If we could clone you, that would be amazing. And that's just it, is that, it's awesome that we have people that really care and are taking that initiative. We need more of it, right? And so that
It gets them in the habit of doing it too.
yeah,
So it's
definitely.
almost second nature for them. Even when they don it on every day, they do a quick inspection on it. And at the end of the month, they all stand around, they fill out their forms. And so repetitive drills in them, just like putting your seatbelt on every day.
Amen. No, and that's kind of why when we had our committee meeting last year and we went around the room and said, what does everybody want to see? And this was the very number one thing. We want to go over and make sure that inspection, and that we're talking about it, and we're doing webinars, and we're putting, documents out there that will help, just kind of help get everybody kind of in that, like you say,
Mindset.
that repetition, and then
Yep.
in the front of their brain, hey, I need to look at this. Because we all do it. We all get used to throwing it on and going, and we have to take that 1 second or 2 seconds that it takes to take that step back. And it doesn't take long to do, even a documented inspection really honestly doesn't take that long.
5 minutes.
Only when I mean and give everybody equipment that is destroyed does it take longer. But no, that's awesome that you guys are doing it monthly and you're getting them into that habit. That's huge, huge in the field. Anyone else? All right, well, I will give you back 13 minutes of your Friday morning.
Thank you, Maggie.
You bet. Have a great one, everybody.
See you
Stay
guys
safe.
later. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.